Hello and welcome to the Work Inspired podcast. I'm your host, George Lucas Pfeiffer. On today's show, we have Janette Scott in the studio. She is a studio leader, senior associate, and architect at Gensler, and we're going to be exploring how to create effective, people-focused spaces where we can learn, work, and thrive. Work Inspired starts right now. Janette, thanks for being here. So excited to have you and your perspective on our show today, and really appreciate you coming down to our space in Chicago to do this in person.
Absolutely. So happy to be here.
So let's start with a question we ask every guest. Set the stage with your personal story or your professional story, I think. How did you get to where you're at today?
Sure. So I'm from a small town in the southwest of Ireland, and growing up, I had no exposure to architecture really, but I knew plenty about construction because I grew up in an old house, used to be an old country school, and every summer there was a project. We were repairing the roof, we were replacing the windows, doing something. So I grew up around the smell of construction, which, I still love the smell of construction. And it was my career guidance teacher in school that led me towards the field of architecture, recognizing where I was, succeeding in school, what I was good at. And really, I just went straight for architecture kind of blindly, and it worked out. I really enjoyed university. I studied in Dublin for 5 years. And then within my last year of school, I started to think, okay, if I'm going to, work abroad somewhere, now's the time to do it as a recent grad. It's never going to be easier. That was something that was not foreign within my family either. I have other, relatives on this side of the pond. So I set my sights on Chicago, really because it's got such a rich history of architecture, and looking at across the architecture firms, I thought there's so much choice here. So I graduated, I flew to Chicago the next day, and I had some interviews lined up, and that was summer of 2008.
Oh, wow.
So I was really lucky. I landed a 1-year internship with a small firm in the Loop, Wheeler Kearns Architects, and that was, I could not have had a better, first experience in Chicago, I don't think. They were doing exceptional work, and they had a really terrific studio environment. I often think of this as my master's in architecture. It was a great kind of introduction to the city of Chicago, and also just allowed me to learn about the craft of architecture and putting that into practice. And so I spent between 8 and 9 years there. And in the last couple of years, I started to think, okay, what else can I do? Because over that amount of time, I started to see, oh, here are some things that I'm actually good at, and that are, these things come easier to me than some other things that I had to do as part of the role of project architect, where you're designing the work, you're drawing the work, you're managing your client, you're, leading the contractor, you're doing all the things. And I have to say, Gensler was always a firm that I, paid attention to, not only because it was a design firm, but then once I really started to research some offices that I was, curious about, I was drawn to their co-leadership model. So at every level of leadership at Gensler, it's usually a man and a woman, but it's always a partnership that are leading something together. And then also, as a large firm, they're an employee-owned company. So you don't have somebody else outside that's telling the firm what you're going to do next, or, changing things. Yeah. And so it's very much a self kind of driven organization, which I really love.
Is it 100% ESOP?
It is.
Oh, very nice. So is BOS.
That's amazing.
Yeah, we love the benefit of having each person along every step of the way be an owner. It's just a little bit of a different, we call it skin in the game, or like investment by the person, because they actually are an owner of the company, right? That's 100%. Very cool. I did not know that.
Yeah, something I think Art Gensler had so much foresight in many fields, and this was clearly one of them.
Wonderful. So I want to talk about Gensler, but tell me a little bit about studying architecture in Ireland. Clearly, architecture is something that happens around the world, but in each region, it might be different, right? So if somebody goes to school here in the United States and studies architecture and design versus in Europe versus maybe in Asia or APAC, is it similar? Are you learning the same techniques, or is it different depending on where you study?
I think yes and no. I think each school has their own maybe angle or area of focus or something that they're known for. When I studied architecture in Dublin, there was like one university to go to in Dublin. And so I had no choice. That's just where I was going. I think about that education in two parts. One part is learning about kind of how you design and think creatively and think critically. So that process of design. And I would think that between schools is more translatable. When it comes to the technical side, we learned about Irish and kind of European, I would say, construction methods. So for example, most buildings are naturally ventilated. It's only in commercial office environments that you have forced air
Mm.
because the environment and the climate is what it is. The other big element is the metric system as opposed to the
Oh,
imperial
yeah.
system. So that actually was the hardest thing to adapt to, because I remember on my first day at work at Wheeler Kearns being handed this scale rule that was so different to any scale rule I'd ever seen, because it was like a pyramid extrusion and had all these random numbers on it, which I didn't understand. And the first scale on a project was 3/64ths of an inch. Our sheets were set up and that was the scale. And I thought, what on earth is 3/64ths of an inch? Like, I just had no way of grasping that.
That makes sense. Fortunately, there's technology now that can do a lot
Now,
of our conversions for us, right?
yes, that helps a lot. But just even how you set up a drawing set or your scale of a drawing on a
Mm,
sheet and what was realistic, that took a little bit of getting used to.
mm.
But otherwise, I think it's a degree that travels well, I would say. Certainly, I think my education in Dublin has really stood well to me.
Tell me a little bit about your role at Gensler
hmm
currently.
I think of myself first as an architect because, I'm trained as an architect. And my role at Gensler, I'm in the role of design manager. And
Mm,
design manager at Gensler is what maybe other firms call a project manager. But in that role, I partner with our design leadership, maybe a design director, it might be an architecture project or an interiors project, to co-lead the client through the design process. So while the design director or design leader is focused on how does the design kind of respond to the client's vision or needs, I'm thinking about what are the client's expectations along the way? How
mm.
does that translate to the deliverables that we're putting together? How do we organize a team? What is the right talent to be on this team to kind of deliver this project? And also engaging with our consultants, our broader team, often working with the contractor on the
Mm,
project. But it's very much, again, a partnership with the design leadership and other people on the project.
mm.
Outside of my role on projects, I co-lead our city's studio. So Gensler, large firm, but within each office, we're divided into more kind of approachable size, almost like mid-sized firms. So our city studio in Chicago has between 40 and 45 architects and designers
Okay.
blended together. So we work pretty seamlessly between teams. And in my role as co-lead, I co-lead the studio. So essentially, we operate like a small business unit
Mm.
under the leadership of our office managing directors and the firm as a whole.
And does the city's studio have a focused
We do.
vertical? Okay.
We do. So, and it's not quite a catch-all, but it's a nice blend.
Mm,
So we in Chicago focus on higher education. So a
okay.
lot of our clients are in Chicago in the Midwest. Then we have healthcare and we also have critical facilities.
Mm,
Then if there's anything that doesn't fall neatly into maybe a workplace or a lifestyle sector, maybe it's a not-for-profit institution, kind of a low or pro bono project, or something in the arts or aviation. It's
mm.
quite a spectrum.
Yeah.
It would fall into our studio.
Interesting. Because when I first met you, you were speaking on a panel on learning spaces, and you have a wide breadth of knowledge as it relates
Mhm.
to higher education and those spaces. I didn't realize that the studio that you're part of was in so many other verticals or spaces. That's very cool.
Definitely. And so what's great about that is, I mean, when business shifts and market shifts,
Hmm.
we have some kind of padding there. And so over the years, over my time at Gensler, I have worked on some critical facilities projects. I've dabbled in a little bit of healthcare, but I would say higher education and some of those other types of projects are kind of my jam.
Oh, wonderful.
Mhm.
So the culture at Gensler, I mean, a lot of
Mhm.
people in our industry in commercial interiors know of Gensler because of the scale and size and
Mhm.
really the prestige of the brand name and the organization. But what's it like
Mhm.
working at Gensler? What's the culture like?
I think it's pretty terrific.
Mm,
I mean, one thing that stood out to me again as I was searching for a firm was I think you see that employee-owned aspect of the
mhm,
firm translate to that culture. So it is very much kind of an employee first or a people first mentality. In my studio, I'm actually quite proud of our culture. I once read this great line that said, "Culture is what happens when nobody is watching."
mm,
And I think we saw that through the pandemic because people were working from home, but we still had this really strong bond. So our team is very supportive. I think the culture is not about doing better by yourself and leaving people behind you, but
mhm.
bringing people with you as you grow, as you learn, and then transmitting that knowledge to others.
Interesting. So kind of a collaborative culture as
Absolutely.
compared to a compete culture or something
Yeah.
with its a little, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You talked about working from home in the pandemic.
Mhm.
What is the current way of working at Gensler? Are you in a hybrid model or?
We are
Nice.
almost 100% back.
Oh, wow.
So principals are back 5 days a week. I find myself in the office 5 days a week. And if I'm not in the office, I'm usually at a client site.
Mm.
And I think that has brought a kind of a richness and a joy back to the workplace. I do think that for 2 years that I was at home, I really missed the sound of laughter.
Mhm.
And now it's just so nice being in the office. Observing, seeing people working together, seeing how, especially for those, like I would say our 0 to 5 year designers, when they worked from home, they weren't privy to the conversations that were happening,
Mhm.
kind of learning by osmosis in the workplace. They missed out on that. And I can see now they're really benefiting from it. And just overall, that sense of camaraderie is really strong.
I love that, especially because you're creating spaces, and so
Absolutely.
you're practicing what you preach.
Absolutely.
I think the fear a lot of business leaders have is ripping the Band-Aid off, or like the
Mm.
path back in. Are they going to lose
Hmm.
people? Are they going to upset their teams?
Hmm.
What was that like at Gensler?
I think it was managed really well within
Mm.
the firm because it was not a sudden shift.
Okay.
It was a gradual shift. And, coming out of the pandemic, everybody had something else, something different going on
Right.
personally. We're all dealing with different things post pandemic. But I think there was a great level of understanding of what individuals' circumstances were. Maybe they lived with somebody older, whatever.
Mhm.
It's different for everybody. But I think over time, we've landed in a really great spot where people recognize that they still have their autonomy. They haven't
Mhm.
lost that. And they're seeing that, yes, absolutely, we're in an industry where we design space for a living. We have a kind of a sense of duty to demonstrating the value of being together in the workplace.
Mhm.
But I would say a lot of my higher education clients actually really appreciate seeing us back in the office
Mm.
because they were at home for a hot minute and then they had to get back on campus because they wanted their students to be back on campus.
Mhm.
So I saw this shift where all of a sudden I was back in the office and all my education clients were so happy to
Mm.
see us there. And even gathering in a room and taking those calls together, it made a big difference.
And it's not insincere. It's
Mm,
genuine. I mean, you work at Gensler because you believe in the power of
right.
space, right? And so it's not a facade that you're putting on. Oh, let's show up and pretend like we're all here and things are, there's value here. There is value, and that's what you're emulating. It's interesting. I've said this on the podcast before, but we did a survey of college students
Mm,
last year, at the end of last year, and it was fascinating that we found an incredibly high percentage of them had a strong desire to be in person. And we believe it's because they went through the pandemic in a learning space in a remote fashion. It was forced upon them. So they
mhm,
experienced firsthand the isolation and what that did to their development.
mhm.
And you compare that to some of the sentiment that we're hearing for people that were already early into their careers when the pandemic started and then got a taste of being at home and having the flexibility. I mean, there is a lot more flexibility and work-life balance if you aren't in the
Mhm.
office. But it was interesting to see the difference between those that went through school during the pandemic versus those who had already made it out and were in
Yep.
the workforce.
Yep.
And I think that just speaks to the opportunity through which development happens when you're together, which is what you just spoke about. So,
Agreed. We've actually done a lot of research on that student engagement
mm,
through both, we have statistics from pre, during, and post pandemic.
mm,
And it is interesting to see the shift in what types of activities students prefer to engage in person versus remotely. And I think, particular to education, it does come down to that engagement piece
mm,
because when you're remote, working through technology, I think today it's very easy to become distracted with,
mhm.
pop-up messages, notifications, all these different things. Whereas when you're in a physical environment surrounded by your peers and that teacher or instructor is able to engage you, that experience is much more impactful.
Yeah, just the relationship that you form
Mhm.
with whether it's your instructor or your peers, that's so important too. Because if you lose that, then you lose some of the capability to collaborate effectively, whether it's trust or risk taking or innovation. I think there's so many cascading impacts for what fully isolation in a remote
Mhm.
environment, enables. Let's talk about leadership. What is your leadership style like?
I've come to think about this. I use a few words to describe how I think about this. They're joy, friendship, and integrity.
Mm,
And I think first, as we're designing, we're often designing to create joy for the end user. We
mhm,
want the end user to enjoy the space. want to be there and make it somewhere like a sticky space.
Mm.
Through my experience, I've learned that as we work with clients, we're not just designing for that end goal, we're working with them across several years a lot of the time. And there's the potential for that working experience to also be an enjoyable process. So that's both for the client that we're working with, their team, often our client has a client internally, but
Mhm.
also for my immediate team. So how do we collaborate together and make it a positive experience for all? I would say with each project, I take the approach as I'm starting a project that each project has the potential to build new friendships, develop new relationships, and build new friendships. And I've found over the course of my time in Chicago, many of my closest friends are people that I've worked with, people that have been on the client side for me, consultants, contractors. It actually doesn't matter. We've just developed these really strong friendships through working together. And then I think there's also a hard part to being an architect sometimes. You can find yourself in between your owner and the contractor on the project. And this spirit of fairness and not taking a side, but really providing feedback that's in the best interests of the project and is fair. Sometimes that falls on the GC side, and sometimes that falls on the owner side. But looking inward also in managing a team and co-leading a studio, I think that that aspect of fairness and integrity is really important when you're dealing with other people, our team, because everybody is at Gensler to grow in their careers and learn as much as they can. And opportunities are finite resource sometimes. You know, we've gone through different kind of waves of markets, certainly through the time that I've been here in Chicago. And sometimes you don't always land on your ideal project. And sometimes you do have to have a conversation with somebody, a team member, who is just dying for an opportunity to, you know, demonstrate their skills, their ability. And you have to say, no, I'm sorry, I would love for you to work on this, but I don't need you on this. I actually need you on this other project that needs your skills more. And it's you might call it taking one for the team. To that individual, it can be really crushing because I've experienced this firsthand. It can be really crushing, but it's also an opportunity to take something new and different out of that. And then hopefully that sets you up better for the next project.
There's clearly a leadership style that is maybe keep your direct reports or your employees a little bit at bay so that you don't develop a friendship so much that when you have to have a hard discussion or talk about accountability or maybe put them in a position that they might not want to be in on a project like you just discussed, the relationship might get in the way. But I could see the other side where it could be helpful to have a friendship or a good relationship with that person. It would make that conversation easier.
Absolutely. And I would say as you grow in leadership, your peer group diminishes, right? So there's always a balance between being friendly and open to that friendship because some people, you know, depending what a team member is dealing with personally, need that from somebody in the workplace. I think what's great about Gensler just as a global firm is I have peers across the firm. So sometimes when you need this kind of peer-to-peer coaching, you can call somebody outside of your office that offers some perspective because they're at Gensler, but they don't know the individuals at play.
Yeah, it's great advice. And I think even at smaller firms, you can do that outside of your industry. You know, I think developing the network and developing those relationships is so important. And that was going to be one of my next questions is how do you do that? I think the 3 words you just gave for a successful relationship, whether it's outside of work or inside of work or within your organization or outside of your organization, I think that's great feedback. I'm interested on the joy piece because we're all humans. We all like to enjoy things, you know, most of us at least. So what are some ways that you, whether it's with your team or that you've seen your clients do it effectively, enable enjoyment at work or fun at work, but also keep sight of business objectives and be accountable for the success that the organization needs to succeed?
Well, I think there's great value in recognizing that if you have a team that is working well together, you have this trust that gets built within your team. There's a great book. I can't remember now the author's name, but it's called The Speed of Trust.
Okay.
And it talks about how there's an economic value to building trust. And so as we approach our teams, we have, you know, lots of team building events that can happen at Gensler. It's like all the various summer sports, design sprints, sometimes on projects. We have, studio meetings, like all the things that design firms do. But the ultimate goal is that you form this strong team because it allows almost this shorthand between team members.
Mhm.
And when you're operating with that trust, you can move more quickly
Mm.
and get to your end goal faster. I found with one of my clients now I've been working with for several years, and we are on our third project with Western Kentucky University. And I have developed this level of trust with the client, and it's mutual. And it means that we can we have an understanding, and we're still going through all the steps, but
Mhm.
often we can go through those steps at a new pace,
Mm.
at a better pace, because we have that trust. And she considers us such a great partner as part
Mhm.
of her team.
That's so valuable because she doesn't have to go finding that or building that now. She's already established it, which you're right, is a
Mhm.
barrier that's not existing on a new project that might if she was finding another team member to work with.
100%.
Very cool. Let's talk about attracting talent or finding talent. You talk about the
Mm.
importance of team.
Mhm.
How do you identify when you're looking for someone new to join? How do you look for the right people, or how do you make sure the right people are on your team?
We rely a lot on referrals.
Okay.
And so just this morning, I had an interview with somebody who was referred to us. And I think just starting with referrals, you kind of can guess that they have a certain level of understanding
Mm.
of Gensler because somebody who's at Gensler said, hey, you should think about Gensler.
Mhm.
I was a referral to Gensler. There's actually a young woman in my studio, and she was a referral from my old firm. She was an interior designer, little experience, but interested. It started off as interested in taking a tour of Gensler. Hey, can I come in and see the office? And I said, sure, no problem. So I gave her a tour. We were talking about what she'd been doing, what she was interested in. And over the course of the conversation, I discover that she's interested in working at Gensler, which I never wanted to assume, but she was. And so that conversation shifted quickly from me just giving her a tour of our office space to really telling her, hey, this is why Gensler is so great.
Mhm.
And thinking, who do I introduce her to next? And how do I make sure that we hire this woman because she's so talented?
Mm.
And so that was a great example of just one referral working out. We've had many. I also think that we have a really great approach when it comes to talent. So, people move away. We had what was named the Great Resignation a few
Mhm.
years ago. People move around in the industry, but I think Gensler does a really great job of keeping that door open.
Mm.
So we have, we call them Gensler boomerangs. When you come back to Gensler, you get
Mhm.
a physical boomerang.
Oh, really?
You do, you do. I think it's a great approach to talent to know that, okay, we're really excited for you. You have this other opportunity, but the door is not closed
Mhm.
and we're always going to be here. So if
Mm.
things change, give us a call.
Mm. It's interesting because one of the reasons we know people make investments in space is they're investing in people.
Mm.
And part of that's attracting talent. It's retaining talent also
Mhm.
and inspiring culture and all these other things, but
Mhm.
attracting talent's one
Mhm.
reason. And when you talk about a return to work strategy, it's interesting that you could have an incredibly great looking space, but if you've only got a couple people sitting in there and someone walks in thinking about coming to work there and they don't see that energy that people bring to a space to extract the value out of it, then it almost backfires.
Right.
So when you work with clients, whether they're whatever vertical they're in, and they're looking to attract talent, because everybody is, right? Especially now. Do they ask you, how do we use this space to do that?
Absolutely.
And what's the perspective? Because I think there's some obvious sounding answers, but it's easier said than done, I think,
Mhm.
sometimes.
I think before you get to the physical space, you
Mhm.
start with the organization's
Mm.
mission, because there has to be an alignment between the individual that you're trying to attract and the organization's
Mm.
mission. For example, we're currently working on the Purdue new Daniel School of Business in West Lafayette. We're early in design, and we know that they have no problem attracting students.
Mhm.
Students are breaking down the doors trying to get in here. They're growing exponentially. It's terrific for the institution. They do have a harder time maybe attracting faculty because
Mm.
you're in a region, it's not a major city, it's a little bit different. So starting with the mission, you're starting with this goal. They are They're integrating engineering and technology into their business program. They're doing a lot of cutting edge things. They are known for engineering. They want to be a top 10 business school. So that is a really exciting culture. They've got great clarity in how they're going to get there. And the building, the physical environment, is really a vehicle to facilitate that growth and to allow these other things to happen. So you could argue that the culture, the excitement, the energy is already there. It's simply housed in a great looking space. And so I feel strongly that these two things go together. You can't have the great looking space without the culture, the mission, and the buzz. And sometimes, like we've seen this with incubators and startups, sometimes that culture, that mission, that buzz can start in a very simple space. Interestingly, Purdue says, give us 4 block walls and a light bulb and we'll figure it out. But just think about how combining that energy with the great environment, it's really a catalyst for that growth.
One of the things I was really excited to talk to you about is related to that, in that you've got this focus on learning spaces. You're at Gensler, so you've got perspective across a lot of different types of spaces. And I think some things, like how people are doing work because of the nature of the work that they're doing, will change between different spaces. Because we're all human, and like we talked about with the enjoyment, are there things that you can apply to the design of a space or the creation of a space that transcend the different functions that need to, the functionality of work?
I think there's an opportunity with each design project to take that sense of identity and let that inform the design.
Okay. Well, how about when you look at a learning space versus another type of space? Do you approach the process in a significantly different way when you're thinking about how it's designed? Or, for example, I think in the corporate world, we're taking a lot of learnings and design from the education space because people seem to want to work in that type of an environment, as we shift away from dedicated cubicles and start integrating more collaborative social spaces into working environments.
I think first, if a space doesn't function well, it's not good design. So starting with understanding those users and what activities need to occur in the space. Through learning, again, our research has identified various forms of learning in addition to learning styles. And you can design for each one of those learning modes. Across the different verticals, there are always going to be, I would say, best design practices.
Okay.
And that's, designing for choice. So you've got different sizes of people, different shapes of people, different people of different abilities physically. How do you design to make each person feel like they have a sense of autonomy in how they use the space, but they also belong there? There is a place for them to sit quietly, do something by themselves. There's also maybe a place for others to gather around, collaborate in some way. And definitely some of these activities are translatable across the verticals.
That makes sense. And in you saying that, I figured out a much more simple way to ask my long question. Are the ways that we learn that much different than the ways that we work?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think when we're learning, we're working, and when we're working, we're learning.
So if that's true, then there are a lot of lessons that we can take from both practices to apply to any space.
Absolutely. Because when we're designing a business school, for example, quite often we go on what we call a design safari with our client. So we go and see other spaces that may be business schools, they may be not business schools, they may be professional environments. And quite often a business school is preparing their students for that professional environment.
Right.
So they're trying to see what the big consulting firms, what are all these cutting edge companies doing, because they want to emulate that. And conversely, I literally just this morning had a conversation with a colleague about what if the workplace of the future is really responding to the business school of today.
You're onto something there, and I think we're seeing it. And I think that the two spaces can inform each other. Whether it's going to learn or going to work, in your opinion, what makes a space worth going to?
For me, the bottom line with that is, if a space is worth going to, it's something that you can't recreate yourself at home. It's something that's so, maybe it's unexpected or so exceptional, or it's a value add that you can't recreate by yourself. You can't sit in a corner and put in your headphones and, do whatever it is you came here to do.
And some of that could be the furniture you're sitting on. Some of it could be the technology that you have access to. And a big part of it's the people that you get to engage with that aren't at your house, right?
Absolutely.
Not through a screen.
They're all ingredients that make this amazing cake.
I love that. And I think that is the answer that we've heard. I'm glad we're hearing it from the authority that is Gensler. But thank you for that. We've talked a lot about how people really matter in a space. What are some ways that organizations looking to create working environments can make sure that they're putting people first when they're making decisions?
So I mentioned Western Kentucky University, and our first project with WKU several years ago was the Student Commons at Home Library. So it was taking an old, dark, a little bit sad library space and trying to make it into a future-oriented, library-informed space that was really celebrating the student. With their student body, they have about 1/3 of their student body is first-generation college students, and 40% are low income. So there are certain struggles that a first-generation student has attending university. And what we observed as part of our research before we started designing this project was a lot of the services today in many universities are, down a hall in a closed room. And maybe you're waiting for a tutor or something, you have to sit outside. There can be the stigma attached with availing of some of those resources. Our design for the WKU Commons was to create this very open space. It's blending library and food service. So you have this anchor, students need to eat. It's an opportunity for them to collaborate, maybe meet with a faculty member. But also we put peer-to-peer tutoring on display. So it's out in the open, we're normalizing it, and we're trying to remove some of that stigma because it doesn't need to be there. Similarly, our current project with Western Kentucky University is their new Gordon Ford College of Business. So it's a new ground-up business school. And a great program that the School of Business has is what they call their clothes closet. So if you're a student that has an interview coming up, you can't afford a suit, you don't have professional attire, you go find your professional wear at the clothes closet.
That's cool.
If they don't have something in your size, they'll actually buy it for you. And it's a tremendous resource. Recognizing first some of the challenges that individuals have is, these examples are from education, but then designing around them, and they become these great centers, places that people gravitate to, and things that make the space unique.
I've got 3 young kids. Is the future of learning in person?
I think it will continue to evolve. I heard a great quote from a faculty member at Purdue last year when we were doing some research, and she said, learning trends will come and go. The most important thing is engagement. And if a student, is engaged in whatever the material is, and that can be asynchronous, it can be remote, it can be in person, it really doesn't matter. But if they're engaged, they will learn.
That's great. It's a great quote. And let's shift now. The kind of the tail end of each episode, I ask a little bit more personal questions or advice type questions. Thank you for the great perspective on what you're doing at Gensler. It's fascinating. What's something you're excited for in the year ahead?
So I mentioned a couple of projects. We have one coming out of the ground at Western Kentucky University. So I'm excited to see that take shape. And we're just designing Purdue. And I think I'm excited for the next project too. There's something super exciting about the unknown. And I would say at Gensler's always doing something new and different. So that's tremendous. This year, I've actually applied for some speaking engagements. So I have a submission into SCUP that is in July in Philadelphia. I don't know if it's been accepted yet. Myself and a friend also submitted something for NeoCon, so we'll see if we get to present out there.
I imagine one of the reasons why you do what you do is because you like to create something and see it come to life. And it's pretty amazing that you get to start with the design and then eventually walk through these spaces, some of which are pretty grand in scale.
I would say
I was a part of this.
Yeah, it's that. I think I definitely felt that early in my career, but what I appreciate more now is seeing the impact that it has on the end user. Something our dean at the Gordon Ford College of Business said a few months back was many of these students have never had anything designed just for them. And they're going to be entering this new school of business that was designed really as a home for them to learn and grow and become professionals in. And that is really special. And I think about what we do as being such a privilege.
Is there a resource that you found valuable in your career that you could recommend to others?
Yeah, so I have a couple of favorite podcasts. Coaching for Leaders gives really tactical, helpful information. Sometimes I'll be on the train coming to work and making notes that I'll refer to later in the day. So it's kind of in the weeds, tactical, but super helpful. And then another one I like is Wisdom from the Top with Guy Raz. He actually once interviewed Diane Hoskins, which was super exciting. I had this moment years ago in my career. It was when I was still at my old firm, and I was thinking for a while that I was done with architecture. I was kind of fed up. I wanted a change. I didn't know exactly what that was. And a friend and mentor recommended this book called Career Crisis by Angela Mazzi. And it was a super quick read. It's for creatives, and it had some really great kind of reflective exercises that helped me realize that, no, I'm in the right profession. Here are things that I can now articulate better, that I understand are valuable, that I'm good at, and that helped me define my value proposition to Gensler when I was interviewing at Gensler. So that was a really important turning point. That was kind of this key that unlocked everything for me.
That's incredible.
And then I would also add, I have a book club that is so precious to me that I realize now we started 13 years ago, and 2 of the members are colleagues from my old office and some other friends that we've picked up along the way. But I think of my book club almost as a board of directors, because for those that are in other industries, we're all professionals, and we talk about work stuff, and we are all kind of guiding each other.
Do you guys read books and then get together and talk about them?
We do, once a month.
That's wonderful. Are they all here in Chicago?
They are, yes.
That's cool. One last question. Advice for future leaders. You've already given so much great advice, so I hate to ask for one more piece, but if you had a morsel of wisdom to pass down.
For me, it's about being genuine. And I think that's something that has stood to me, that I can't be not genuine, but I think I would say be genuine in your words and in your actions, because people know when you're not being truthful, or it for me, it comes back to building trust. The more genuine you are, people are more inclined to trust you.
I completely agree. And I want to say thank you for everything you've inspired us on, with it on the show today. Really appreciate your perspective and your time. Thanks, Janette.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to rate our show. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Work Inspired podcast so that you don't miss any of the incredible guests we have planned for upcoming episodes. We'll continue to find the best and brightest minds in business so that you can learn, grow, and succeed, and so that we can all work inspired. Work Inspired is brought to you by BOS, a leader in commercial working environments and a Hayworth best-in-class dealership. Experience our 360 approach and discover the team, tools, and techniques required to navigate the complexity of your next workspace at BOS.com. If you have ideas, feedback, or would like to be featured on our show, please email podcast@BOS.com. Thank you for listening. This has been a Workspace digital production. If you're interested in launching a podcast at your organization, please email info@workspace.digital for a free consultation.